Welcome to JGTCR. I'm Cope, and today we are taking a look at all the new engine swaps after update 1.65 on GT7. Let's get into it. In this video, we will provide a quick 2-minute stabilizer tune so that these chassis are at least drivable post-swap, and some brief commentary on how the vehicle performs with the engine swap. Please keep in mind that these are preliminary tunes. For more fleshed out tunes, keep an eye out for the tuner series also available on this channel. So, without further ado, let's take a look at our first chassis. Any vehicle that gets the Chiron swap is going to be a pain to pin down due to the massive engine messing with the weight distribution and the massive amount of power that comes along with it. This Camaro does handle it reasonably well compared to some of the other chassis, however, it does still suffer the usual traits and issues. The nose is extremely heavy, so it understeers quite a bit. That is, of course, until the power comes on full song, then it tries to snap the back end. Extending the gear ratios via top speed adjustment has helped, but it is still brutal if we don't manage it properly. A more customized gear set will help this considerably, but this is beyond the scope of this video. We will need to settle the suspension going into turns and use copious amounts of throttle modulation if we want this Camaro to comply with our demands. If we are smooth, calculated and patient on inputs, this Camaro can be driven at a considerably fast pace. Everything we just stated about the Camaro is also true in this Corvette. It's the same engine, same driveline, same problems. However, this chassis does handle the swap much more poorly. Once again, the nose is very heavy and wants to understeer when cornering. That is, of course, until we exit the turn and it comes on full song, then wants to snap our neck as the tail steps out. We have used the same tactics in our approach to tuning this Corvette. The ballast has been used to level off the weight distribution and help with traction, and the gear ratios have been extended via top speed again to help with traction. And while this works well enough, it still breaks traction easily if we are careless. Due to the massive weight and excessive amount of power, it takes a really long time for this Corvette to start slowing down. As such, we must ensure to pick some very early brake markers if we intend to stop before the turn. The third verse is the same as the first and second. However, this chassis does handle the swap better than those that have come before it. We have much more control over the steering, and getting the power to the ground seems much more manageable in this chassis. This C7 is considerably less aggressive and seems more stable. However, it is aggressive nonetheless. If we are smooth on inputs and use a great deal of throttle modulation, this Corvette responds considerably well considering the circumstances and is much easier to place on track than the previous two Chevys with the same swap. The brakes are fairly stable and give us plenty of movement if we wish to turn and brake at the same time. However, slowing down does take a considerably long time. The C8 Stingray is just a mid-mount rear-wheel drive version of what we have already experienced so far. This layout is actually worse when it comes to traction and slowing down. Overall, it is the worst Chiron swapped vehicle in this update. The power is consistently brutal, and while the top end speed ratios have helped, it is still an absolute menace to try and drive hard. The tail kicks that we experience when we wheel spin are devastating and can easily wreck our race if left unchecked. Use throttle modulation to try and keep as much traction as possible, but make no mistake, this Chevy will try to slide in all conditions. As previously mentioned, the brakes are horrendous, so it takes millennia to slow down to pace to be able to take turns. So use caution and brake super early, or be prepared to get up close and personal with Bazzy Rizzy. And finally, a chassis that does not have a Chiron swap. The toughest part of dialing this Pantera in is getting it to steer. It just wants to plow straight ahead. The power is crisp and peaky, which propels us well when we have grip, but it also causes quite a bit of understeer. When we break traction, it's very snappy Tom indeed, and it throws us off the track with no issues, so ensure to get on top of any wheel spin ASAP. The chassis does feel rather stiff and isn't flexible. However, we need to do this with the suspension to stop the wobble fest that is the Pantera. Overall, this swap does feel a bit out of place, and it also isn't easy to dial in or drive. But hey, it works well enough for now. Moving on to the Ford Shelby, and we're back to a Chiron swap. Such a lack of creativity for the swaps this time around. As usual, we have a nose-heavy rear-wheel drive vehicle. We have done the usual tricks to get it in line, and honestly, these Chiron swap vehicles feel quite similar to drive. Extending the top speed and the tune does keep it relatively in check. However, this Shelby does still have the tendency to understeer going into turns when we have traction, and the tail end snaps and kicks aggressively when the engine comes on full song. Once again, throttle modulation and smooth inputs all around make this Shelby drive much better. And the brakes, as usual, are terrible. This is due to the excess weight of the engine and the ballast we used to level out the chassis. So brake early, brake well, and try to do it in straight lines. These GT F3500 swaps all run similarly, so we will slap them all out in one hit. The A chassis gets the B and Espace swap. The B chassis gets the A and Espace swap. This means the two 3500 chassis have a V8, V10 and V12 option. These are F1 style vehicles and handle about the same, with some differences based on engine and its power delivery. Realistically, these vehicles should be dialed in depending on the specific track that they are on. However, we have provided a blanket tune that should make these vehicles a bit more malleable. The suspension is firm and bumpy and does not like any uneven surfaces. Once we start pushing, all it takes is to clip a curb the wrong way or hit a bump in the road and it's all over. Once we find a good route around the track and the flow, we start shaving away time. But make no mistake, all it takes is one error or misjudgment and it all goes pear-shaped. So, use caution. There is lots of downforce pinning us to the road, and we really do have to trust that downforce to keep a fast pace. The Espace swap drives well out of the box, but extending the gear ratios via top speed and firming the tail has slashed a few seconds off our time. The Espace engine does seem to have more bottom-end torque and is peakier in nature than the A or B engine. This means we will have to use more throttle modulation with this engine in place. And now let's talk about the B engine swap. This is just a snip-snap criss-cross spaghetti swap. In simple terms, it turns A into B and B into A respectively. It's just that simple. We have slapped a very similar tune into both chassis with both engines and achieved the same kind of results. All of these vehicles lap around the circuit within 1 to 2 seconds of each other. For the F1 purists out there playing GT7, this is a great addition, allowing for tribute and era-specific builds. But for the rest, this difference will be negligible. The Espace engine swap in the 3500-B is the same as in the 3500-A. However, it does seem that the B chassis is more stable overall. That being said, it could also be a placebo effect due to driving these chassis for an extended period of time. While the B chassis does seem more stable and appears to take the engine swap better than the A, it is only marginally better, so don't expect a world of difference between the drives. And now, let's comment on the A engine in the B chassis. This combination gives us more power in a seemingly more stable chassis. That being said, the engine and power delivery respond pretty much the same as previously mentioned. While there are some mild differences to all these chassis and engine combos, at the end of the day, they all performed around the same when it came to lap time. That being within 1.3 seconds of each other, which could be accounted for in driver error. At the end of the day, what it all boils down to is that we now have 6 variants of the GT F3500 chassis combos. So do with that what you will. The Honda N1 takes the swap extremely well, a bit too well. Even straight out of the box, it drives considerably well. The handling is a bit wobbly from being top heavy, but it works well enough. The steering is next to perfect, almost no impact from the power. We only really have issues when we are turning too hard at high RPM. The engine screams as we make our way through the revs, but it does not seem to push that hard at all. The power delivery is again next to perfect. We hardly get any wheel spin unless we are pushing too hard or being silly. Overall, the 2 and 4 engine in the Honda N1 is a surprisingly good fit. And here we are with another Chiron swap in the Lamborghini Urus. In this build, we had to use the Type A front bumper aero to actually get any downforce. This Lambo has an extremely nasty habit of kicking the tail while under braking conditions. Most of our efforts during tune time went into correcting this trait. While we did manage to make this manageable, this trait does still exist in mild form when heavy braking, especially from high speeds. The handling is more prone to understeer, but this is much better than dealing with the tail end kicking every time it came on full song. The power is brute force and easily smashes the limiter on gas. Clearly, this is a very heavy car with a very heavy engine with a lot of ballast to level it off. As such, we will need to begin braking at the dawn of time to make sure we pull up for the turn. My advice is brake early, brake well, brake long, and overall make sure to brake in straight lines. The Mazda Spirits with the 13B. This isn't too bad with default settings, but it does like to kick the tail rather aggressively. Our tune has taken care of the snappy tail end, but now we have some mild understeer to contend with. It's a good trade-off, but can take some getting used to. The engine's power curve is fairly steep, and it can make the tail a bit squirrely, but it's more than manageable with just some mild throttle modulation. The power delivery is decent thanks to winding out the top speed. However, we are using anti-lag at weak as boost is a bit lazy coming on. Due to the high speed and high RPM, the brakes can struggle to slow us down, so use caution. This FTO has lots of power going to the front wheels, and it takes an extreme kind of tune to keep it in check. We have dumped a whole bunch of ballast up front to try and get on top of traction loss. We also wound out the top speed to assist with traction. To be honest, we could wind it out a bit closer to 500 kilometers per hour. However, we would need to bring fourth and fifth down as they would become unusable gears. While our efforts have helped with traction, we still get a lot of wheel spin. As it stands, this FTO has one decently usable gear, third. It does most of the heavy lifting, and we will need to heavily modulate it to have decent pace. The brakes work well in straight lines, however, it can get a bit wriggly if we try and use any kind of turning inputs. For some reason, the aero parts we applied to this KPGC10 don't provide any downforce whatsoever. This makes this vehicle a sketchy ride no matter what we do. This Skyline has a slide problem. It's always wanting to skid and kick, so it's up to us to use some throttle and self-control to get this across the line. The top speed gearing has been set to try and give us more traction while not being too bogged down. It does work, however, I can't say that I'm happy with it. The power delivery still tries to kick the tail end at every turn, so use caution, and if it does start to slide, be very smooth on inputs or it will kick, snap back, and leave us facing the wrong way. The steering works well, but as previously mentioned, when the tail breaks loose, it's a roll of the dice as to how it will all go down. This Skyline definitely needs more time spent on the tune, and it ain't going to be easy. This Skyline does not feel out of sorts with the engine swap at all, as it's an enhanced version of what it already comes with. The balance is good and it drives well out of the box. Naturally, we have upped the top speed and tried to make the drive more stable. Our tune got rid of some mild understeer and a nasty tail kick, which happened especially under brakes. It now drives extremely well and is easy to place on track. The brakes are now solid and stable all the way. The tail end will only step if we are coming in too hot. This R33 is balanced differently to the R32. But with some adjustments to the settings, we get a similar drive out of it while being faster and more stable. The handling is good all round. It's easy to drive and place on track. The steering can have understeer if we stomp on the gas, but if we are smooth, it's awesome. The power can be aggressive in the lower gears, however, it's golden from third onwards. Overall, this is a brilliant outcome for this Skyline. It's smooth and easy to drive and probably one of the most comfortable swaps in this update. The Renault Megane is an absolute mess with the Espace swap. It's all over the shop with hefty oversteer, tail kicks, understeer, and overall erraticness. We must drive cautiously as the tail end easily breaks traction just by bumps in the road and even changes in elevation. When we do experience wheel spin, it can often instantly snap out the tail, but when it grips, there is hella understeer to contend with, and the transition between the two states is like a light switch. 1 second you're gripping and ripping out of a turn, the next you're facing the wrong way. We will need to be very cautious on throttle and very smooth on inputs to keep this thing on the track. The brakes really aren't up to the job of slowing us down. The speed and RPM are just too much for the brakes to deal with. Overall, this swap seems to be the worst of the update. The Suzuki Carry also gets the 2 and 4 engine swap, and this Suzuki drives fine out of the gate, but with a few tweaks, it's more than happy to shave a few seconds off our time. The handling can seem a bit understeerish if we are pushing, but this is due to pinning the tail end. Before tuning, the tail end did like to step out, and once we lost traction with the 2 and 4 engine, it's all wheel spin. As such, the main priority should be to not lose traction. After update 1.65, the power seems pretty weak from this engine, and that seems more evident here than with the Honda N1. The 2 and 4 engine does not like being without revs, and this is the cause of many of our slides, so we should always try and be slightly on throttle. The brakes slow us down decently in straight lines. If we try and turn, it can cause slides. Overall, the engine swap does make the Suzuki Carry faster and quite a bit more fun. The D-Tuned AE86 11 is far too low in factory trim. It scrapes the road with the front end and the wheels make contact with the guards/fenders. It needs to be raised and the suspension firmed up before it starts performing well. The end result post-tune is a good solid handling experience. There is some understeer present when the rear hooks and we push, but it's very manageable. The power feels lazy, but it does get us up and moving pretty fast. The top speed adjustment has given us better top end and has also taken care of the bite out of the tail end. The power delivery is fairly solid, but the tail can still step out on full throttle and full turn conditions, but we should expect as much. The brakes are good in straight lines and decent while turning, but the tail can still step out if we are too eager on the anchors. The Espace swaps are horrible. They change the dynamic of the car even when it's standing still. This Supra does handle the swap better than the rest. However, it is still a weird and annoying engine chassis combo to try and tune. The tunes provided are supposed to be bass tunes, but this really needs an advanced tune to make it work properly. We briefly dived into a gear ratio tune because this Supra was in desperate need of it. However, there is still plenty of work to be done. The handling is reasonable as long as we have traction, but it all goes out the window as soon as we lose traction. In this particular setup, first is our main gear. We will balance traction with the throttle through turns and wind out through the remaining gears while on the straights. The power delivery is crispy aggressive. Even the slightest loss of traction can cause massive time loss, and it opens us up to major wheel spin. As such, it is imperative to be masterful on throttle control. The brakes work well in straight lines, but can be extremely squirrely if we try to brake and turn. The LFA engine is very peaky in nature, so getting it to stick in the lower gears was the main mission. And while it is better, it needs much more work in the gear ratios. If I'm being honest, most of these engine-swapped vehicles require some heavy work on the gear ratios. And while I did my best to ignore it, when I got to these last few cars, I just couldn't take it anymore. The handling is a mixed bag of over and understeer, which is heavily reliant on how we choose to drive. Being smooth on inputs gives us traction at the rear, but understeer up front. Being more aggressive on inputs induces oversteer and feels easier to control, however, it heavily impacts our time. It really comes down to us trying to find the perfect balance for our own driving style. This 8.6 prefers to be driven at about 90% capacity. Here it thrives and is consistent, but push that 10% more and we start rolling the dice as far as how the handling characteristics go. The happy medium is to be cautious on tight turns and more carefree on broader turns and on the straights. And there you have it, a quick bass tune and rundown for each of the new engine swaps available on GT7 after update 1.65. For more fleshed out tunes for all vehicles on GT7, keep an eye out for the tuner series also available on this channel. And that's all we have for you today, so until next time, keep racing!